Because this was such a big deal, Robert Anderson, who was now a general, was invited back one day out of his retirement to do the honors. Some will claim that Lincoln was also invited, but declined because his advisors told him they didn't think it would be safe for him to come down to the South, raise the United States flag over what was once a Confederate fort in front of a city that never really cared much for him in the first place. He also had theater tickets for that night. About 10 p.m. that night, as Anderson was down here raising a toast to Lincoln, John Wilkes Booth was pulling the trigger. Makes you wonder if history would have been any different. Now, before I let the idea was that these three forts could provide crossfire for each other. This was a good idea in theory, but there was one small problem. You need land to build a fort. Can anybody guess what was here in about 1820? The closest land was the sandbar that's 10 feet underwater at low tide, which means when construction of the fort began in 1829, 70,000 tons of rock and granite were imported from New England to build the island. So this is a man-made island that was made specifically for Fort Sumter. It was also built to hold 135 cannons. In December of 1860, there were 15. By the time of the bombardment in April, there were 60, and then throughout the rest of the war, the Confederates would add roughly another 30, bringing the total up to only 90. So now that the fort's under construction, we are going to skip ahead just a little bit. Does anybody know who was elected on November 6th of 1860? Yeah, Abraham Lincoln. The South, particularly South Carolina, was not very happy about this. In fact, they had stated prior to this election that if Lincoln became president, they would secede. And that's exactly what happened. On December 20th, they convened in Charleston and voted unanimously to secede. So South Carolina was not only the first state to secede, but they were also the only state to do so unanimously. All the other states were divided on the issue. After this incident, seeing if this man could talk him into leaving the fort. This may have been one of Anderson's artillery students at West Point, and after graduation had been his teacher's assistant. Anybody want to take a guess at who it was? P.G.T. Beauregard. The Confederates told Beauregard that if he spoke to Anderson, they'd make him a general. Beauregard thought it was a pretty good deal, so he agreed. He and Anderson communicated, but Anderson still refused to leave, so Beauregard issued an ultimatum that stated Anderson and his men had 1 hour. He realizes that he doesn't have the manpower to fight the fire and fight the Confederates at the same time. Of the 60 cannons he has, he's only able to return fire with about 9 or 10 of them because it takes 5 men to work 1 gun, and they were having to work these guns in shifts. Also, 8 of his 85 men were not helping with cannons at all. That's because those 8 men were his band. And musical instruments really won't do much good in a situation like this. So Anderson decided it was time to surrender. But he did have 3 conditions. Beauregard was not allowed to take prisoners. They wanted to give a 100-cannon salute as they lowered their flag, and they wanted to take the flag with them when they left the fort. Beauregard agrees to these terms, and the ceremony is planned for April 14, 1861.